Good evening, everyone. And we have silence. Come on, we're going to try that again. Good evening, everyone. There we go. There we go. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces, so many leaders, colleagues, and honestly, superheroes across the UI community here tonight, people who have shaped and strengthened the nation's unemployment insurance program, some of you for your entire lives and for many decades. So the Academy is really honored and privileged to continue a year of marking really important legislative milestones this year. And to kick us off tonight, I'll just say I'm Rebecca Vallis, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as the Chief Executive Officer of the National Academy of Social Insurance. It's been quite a year of legislative anniversaries, and we've seen many of you at many of these events. 90 years of Social Security, 60 years of Medicare and Medicaid and the Older Americans Act, 35 years of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Those are just a few. But tonight, we're here to mark an extraordinary milestone, and that is the 90th anniversary of unemployment insurance, one of the cornerstone achievements, as many of you have reminded us and many in the community, of the New Deal, and today still a critical pillar of our shared social contract. And to give Frances Perkins a little bit of love and her due, which she does not get enough of, 90 years ago, when Frances Perkins and FDR and their contemporaries were imagining unemployment insurance, they weren't just designing an economic policy. They were giving shape and giving form to a moral idea that we're all in this together, and that we the people, don't leave our people to face hard times alone. Now, we know, all of us in this room and many of us who will be watching this recording, that this is a challenging moment for many working in and around social insurance, and UI is very much part of that. And I'm sure we'll hear some of that from tonight's illustrious panel. But as we mark 90 years of unemployment insurance in challenging times that we are all living through together, it feels even more important to me personally, and I think to many of us in this room, to remember the program's origins, and that with so much of what the New Deal birthed, UI included, the very idea of UI was born in a time of crisis. In fact, in the crucible of the Great Depression. And in the generation since, the UI system has faced recessions, major economic changes, most recently a global pandemic that tested the program's very foundations. And yet, through all of it, the unemployment insurance community and the social insurance community more broadly, including many of the leaders here tonight, have kept the moral compass of this program pointed true north. So before we dive into tonight's conversation, which again, we promise will be brief, but I think really enlightening, I want to take a moment to recognize the extraordinary leaders in this room, many of whom have dedicated your careers to protecting, modernizing, and strengthening unemployment insurance for America's workers and families, and as a key part of the nation's economic toolkit. And in particular, I would like to say for all of the current and former leaders from the Department of Labor who have worked on UI, please wave a hand or please stand to be acknowledged. Many of you are in this room. I also want to give a special acknowledgement to someone who has been an incredibly important force in my own life, and who is a real tireless force who threatens she's about to retire from the unemployment insurance community, my mentor from my legal aid days. I'm getting emotional as I say this, and that's Sharon Dietrich. And I have to say a highlight of having tonight's event is actually that I get to hang out with her, because we don't see that much of each other these days. She's shaped many people's careers who do this work across social insurance, including my own. Sure. So as we gather tonight, it feels incredibly important to reconnect with the foundation of the unemployment insurance program and to ask the question, not just what have we achieved in 90 years, but where do we go in this next chapter? And that's the spirit that we're really here to rekindle tonight, to reflect on how far we've come, to be honest about where we still fall short, and to reimagine together what UI can and must become for the next 90 years as really a promise promise we make to each other. And to do that, we are so incredibly fortunate to have a really amazing panel of thinkers and leaders and practitioners who have dedicated many, many years to that mission. And to lead that conversation, I am so thrilled to turn things over to my dear colleague and a very good friend, Michele Evermore, who is no stranger to this community, who has been such a leader advancing worker-centered policies throughout her career, from working for Senator Tom Harkin to overseeing UI modernization at the Department of Labor to now her time as a senior fellow at the Academy, and so much more. So please join me in welcoming Michele Evermore, who will introduce our panel.
All right, thank you so much. And we have on the stage various people who are heroes of mine in the UI space in one way or another. So Rebecca Dixon is the president and CEO of the National Employment Law Project. And most people don't realize this, but she came to NELP as a UI expert and has written some of the foundational things and has been an inspiration for me in so many ways in just coming to understand unemployment insurance. So thank you for joining us. Portia Woos, who I've known since our days in the Senate. She was a staffer for Senator Kennedy on the HELP Committee. She led the Employment and Training Administration and is now the Secretary of Labor in Maryland, where she's doing amazing things that are just unprecedented. Rachel West, who was co-author of a paper that totally inspired me to really focus on unemployment insurance in 2016 when she was with the Center for CAP, the Center for American Progress, sorry, I'm a little nervous. And she's worked for the White House, for Senator Bennett, and has just been an amazing thinker on both unemployment and the connection to reemployment. And then Amy Simon, who's with LexisNexis, formerly the Simon Advisory, and she was also a senior leader at the Employment and Training Administration, and is one of my favorite people to talk to about technology. So thank you for all joining us. I think I want to kick this off with the issue of the moment, Portia. Federal workers. Everybody went back to work today. Not everybody, right? A lot of people have lost their employment, their federal employment, and a lot of those people live in Maryland. And Maryland has really been leading the way in how to address federal workers in this really confusing, really tough moment. So I wanted to, ask you a little bit, ask you to talk a little bit about what you're doing for federal workers in Maryland.
Thank you. Thank you, Michele. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you to the National Academy. This is wonderful to be here. I feel lucky to be here because I sit at a state seat now, but obviously I sat in the legislative and federal seats, and that's what UI is about, right? It's federal, state partnership, it's tech, it's policy, it's sort of all of it coming together. In terms of federal workers, I do think the situation we're seeing, so for us in Maryland, about 1 or every 6 or 7 workers is either a federal employee or a federal contractor. So it's a huge impact on our economy. Obviously, federal workers have their own special slice of the UI pie. And so thinking about how does a program like this work for them, for those who are furloughed, they got UCFE, but they're going to have to pay it back. For those who were accepted, they had to work without pay. UI did not cover them, so we stood up a supplemental loan program to help those individuals bridge their expenses during this time of government shutdown. I think what those things tell us about UI, and like all states, I think I can speak for them, we all have the same challenges with unemployment insurance, declining administrative funding, increases in fraud, difficulties combating, ever-changing IT landscapes and keeping current. But I think what the federal landscape and the federal shutdown and the impacts on federal workers has shown us is that, this is a safety net that needs updating. It doesn't meet all needs all the time. There are challenges, there are issues with adequacy of benefits and frankly of coverage because, the situations of different workers differ. And so I think as we embark on a conversation, it's hard to believe we were, talking about UI modernization over 15 years ago and got that legislation done. Sometimes when you face challenging times, this is the moment to take a rethink and relook at some of these issues and say, okay, when we last did a refresh, like not everyone had the internet in their pocket before. We didn't have these AI tools. We didn't have all these things. Now is that moment maybe to take that look.
Thank you so much. That sort of leads me to Amy. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, some of your efforts in the 2016-2020 timeframe really led innovation and technology modernization in a way that like everybody's been just following, right? So, I just want to talk to you a little bit about what good looks like in technology modernization.
Yeah, I think that question has been floating around unemployment insurance circles and the states and the vendor community for decades in some sense. So I don't pretend that I will have the answer right here. But I think that is one of the things that as I've thought about where we are, funding is not at a high level. It does not look like it's going to return to high levels anytime soon. States need solutions that are sustainable, but also scalable. So they have to be responsive, have to be built for the time when claims do go higher. And I think the reality of the fraud threat is that they also have to be responsive and nimble enough to deal with the evolving conditions. So when you think about all of those constraints, I think I've moved in some sense from thinking about the definition of good to the definition of good enough. Like what is operationally the baseline of what is expected? And so I think the timeliness of benefits, the accuracy of benefits, those have been long-term program measures in unemployment insurance. But I think there's a space for a third category for that technology good enough in some sense of what is the baseline for states' cybersecurity posture, for states' anti-fraud investments, for states' ability to scale. I think about questions, if claims were to double tomorrow, what would your state look like? Would you be able to respond? And I think we should think about investing in states so they can answer those sorts of questions. So both the measures and then tailoring how we support states to meet that goal, knowing that we have constraints, and those constraints aren't going anywhere anytime soon.
Right. Rebecca, I'm gonna turn this over to you because you were actually one of the first people to really write a lot about technology and administration in 2015. And I kind of want to get your thoughts about, what technology should look like and administration going forward for the, next several years.
Sure, Michelle. Thank you for having me. One of the most important things that I remember from that report was that at the time, the average UI system was 25 years old. And we would not want to do business with a bank that had IT that was 25 years old, right? But our public investment was not there. And there were systems that were up to 40 years old and having to find COBOL programmers to program the system. And it means that the system cannot adapt when there's a crisis. So during the pandemic, when Congress wanted to give benefits that were sort of tailored to what the state's economy looks like, they weren't able to because the systems couldn't take that kind of programming. And so we actually have to invest in these systems. They actually need to be being updated when we're not in a crisis so that workers are not having to wait an inordinate amount of time to actually get these benefits that are supposed to be supporting them. And so for administration, we do need investment in technology. We need to prioritize that. I do also remember from that report, there were a lot of failed technology projects where $60 million was spent in California and it was not functional, and a huge amount was spent in Florida and the system that they got was not functional. I think that there have been definitely improvements since then, but these systems are really vital. And, I really am sad that UI is a thing that doesn't really get attention unless there's a recession or an impending, maybe, recession like right now. And it's something that it's a crisis for any worker when they don't have a job, whether it's a recession or not. And so I do think focusing on administrative funding and support, there was some of that in the previous administration and some of that money was clawed back. but we should still stay focused on making sure that workers can access these benefits when they need them.
Thank you. Rachel, I want to turn to you because, one thing that has eroded in recent years, but I think could really be reinvigorated, is the connection between unemployment and reemployment. And we've seen sort of promising models like the navigators in Maine, for example, that have really been like, okay, today we're getting you unemployment, come back next week and we're going to talk about how you find your next job. So I just wanted to talk to you because you've been doing some innovative work on that front.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle, and thank you to Rebecca and others for hosting us. So when I think about the reemployment aspect of UI, I really think about this sort of like third purpose that sometimes gets hidden behind income support and macroeconomic stabilization, which is like keeping workers attached to the labor market. And more, as there have been realized or not yet realized talk of disruption from AI, I think we're in a little bit of a new, potentially new moment where, as we see threats to white collar workers who, let's be honest, when 1 in 4 unemployed workers are getting UI, and it's very largely leaving out lower income workers, folks who are struggling are the least likely to get UI. We're talking about a more privileged population of workers, unfortunately, until we can modernize and expand and reform the system. And so I think we're in a moment where there's suddenly, more workers who receive UI who are thinking, I might not be able to go back to my existing sector of employment. I might need retraining, or policymakers think maybe that is going to be the case on the horizon. So I think we're in a new moment for thinking about the reemployment aspects of UI. And so I would sort of point to 3 things. So the first is, doing more of what works and doubling down on it. And that's, a great example is reemployment services and eligibility assessments. So RICEA, which most people in this room are probably deeply familiar with, one of the few evidence-based programs that we have in workforce writ large, combining, measurements of assessments of whether folks are meet the eligibility and work search criteria for UI with, reemployment services often by the 5th week that they're claiming. Very highly successful at getting people back to work quickly, at reducing, UI duration and cost to states and the federal government, and sustained employment effects, which is great. We should be doing more of it. Funding has really ramped up from $80 million a decade ago to, almost $400 million today, but it's still only reaching, 20 to 25% of workers, and could be doing a lot more. So I would say doubling down on RICEA as an example. Second is the promising practices that you're talking about, navigators, and your study with Alex Hurdle-Fernandez at Columbia and David Madland at CAP is a great example of like Maine's navigator program really worked to increase UI take-up and get people not only back into employment, but I think we hope higher quality employment than often is the case for these rapid reemployment systems like RICEA is supposed to be, like WIOA is supposed to be. And then the final thing is better connecting to the public workforce system. WIOA funding it's not large, but it's stable and it's not going away, and hopefully we'll get a reauthorization one of these days of the public workforce system. We'll see, but that is a stable source of funding for training for workers, and so when you need training, that is where they should be sending you. But I think there's a couple of key barriers, one of which is the stigma that in many cases UI claimants feel about going to American Job Centers, for example, which is an unfortunate thing that we do need to tackle, perhaps by looking at new venues for whether it's community colleges or libraries or technology for delivering those services. And then, we are supposed to be integrating the public workforce system and UI, and many states are doing a great job of that. Other states are not, and I think we can think about creative things to ensure that workers get, when they need it, get training, up to and including, having the public workforce system screen folks for, do you need training, up to thinking about piloting projects like, giving UI benefits, continuing UI benefits to folks who are participating in training. All of that takes money, but it takes the kind of, I think, creative thinking that a lot of folks on this stage have done.
Great, thank you. Portia, I'm gonna hit you with a double-headed question, basically tying together the last two things we've talked about, which is, first of all, Maryland had to go live with a new system during the pandemic. Now you're sort of dealing with that, and like really starting to be forward thinking in how you're doing technology modernization. I want you to talk a little bit about that, and then also, I suspect that as former leader of the Employment and Training Administration, you have some big thoughts on connecting unemployment and reemployment.
So I was not at Maryland, actually. My former colleague John Palish was at Maryland during the pandemic. I can say I think changing systems in the middle of a crisis maybe is not the best time. It is better to do it at another time. But I think no matter when any state made these transitions, right, it was always difficult. It's difficult to train staff on IT. And I will say we're trying to strike this balance. Absolutely, we do need to do more modernization. I wish we had more support to do it. Hopefully we'll be able to work with the federal government to figure that out. But I also think there's some part of this, and this gets to the AI question too, that you're always going to need that human in-person touch. And a lot of people, maybe because they have low digital literacy, maybe just because they're not sure what's happening to their information, or frankly, maybe because you cannot figure out another way to verify their identity because it's been stolen before and they're flagged for fraud, still need to come in person. And so you need to, I think it's not, IT is not the answer to everything. And it's hard to replace that knowledge. That said, there are many tools, I think, that can benefit us. And I forgot the second part of your question. There was an AI part, and then there was
the second part is the connection between unemployment and reemployment.
Yes. I do think, first of all, I think there is a lot of states established, like we have Maryland Workforce Exchange, a lot of states established these portals to help individuals. I do think we need to relook at some of those models because now we have LinkedIn, we have privately run forums and portals or Indeed or Monster where people would normally go. And I think we have to understand how do those tools and resources, how are we best incorporating them? But I also, I think there's some great ideas here on the table. And I do think especially because AI is going to change the kinds of people who may suddenly be finding themselves looking for work and maybe looking for work for a longer period of time with potential real industry disruption, that we need to take a hard look at how do we connect these things better. I just got an email from someone the other day who was very upset that they had to go to their, I still say RESEA, but I'm not sure it's RESEA or what it is, but very upset they had to go to 2 workshops because they sort of felt offended by that. They are somebody with a college degree and a master's. They know how to look for a job. Why am I putting them through these paces? But, our thought is, well, if you're getting the benefits and you're at high risk, you have to demonstrate and you have to participate in these activities and you have to be engaged in looking for other work. So I think they're going to be, it's an opportunity, again, like I said, to rethink this. Love to hear from all the experts in this room what some of those best practices are.
Great. I'm going to move on to a slightly spicier topic right now, which is, there's a lot of conversation about UI reform going forward. And I kind of think of it as 3 buckets of reform: who gets it, how much, and for how long, right? And there are a lot of ideas about that out there. A lot of us have talked about those, but I want to turn to Rebecca and then Rachel to talk about what are some things we should really be focusing on about the future of unemployment insurance and who gets it for how long and how much.
Sure, Michelle. We actually need to modernize the program to match the workforce that we have now. Right now, we have folks who are doing digital jobs, platform jobs. We have most layoffs that happen now are permanent. When the program was created, it was mostly for short-term layoffs where people were called back to work. It was at that point that employers wanted to invest in the program because they wanted those workers to be around to come back. And fast forward to now, those workers are gone permanently for them. And so I think there's less support from employers around how do we put resources into this program. And so one big piece in a lot of the states is solvency and being able to generate enough revenue to pay out a decent benefit. And that's a really critical and important part of this. I think really thinking about what is it that workers need? How are we designing it as a human-centered design around what people need to go through these interfaces when they're in a tough space? How are we creating it so that it's easy for them to access what they've earned in their work? And I think really, in the short term, there's things like the Wyden-Bennett bill that put in a federal floor for the minimum amount of benefits, weeks, replacement rates, those kinds of things for the states. But I think longer term, we need to be thinking about how we reimagine this program to actually meet the needs of the folks that we have right now and not kind of tweak this legacy 1930s system.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I'm going to say one thing that is really boring and one thing that is, I think, not. The first is just doubling down on we got to achieve the basics in every state. 26 weeks at least. We need, like reasonable replacement rates that don't leave people, at threat of like being evicted. As basic examples, like every state should meet minimum bars, and so many just simply are not. And we see when we hit a recession what that looks like for workers. 1 in 4 unemployed workers getting UI is nowhere near enough for any of the purposes of UI, including just basic like macroeconomic stabilization. So that segues into the second thing that I think is sort of less basic, and the Wyden-Bennett bill and so many of the reforms that folks have put out in this room would achieve all of that and more. But the second thing is, as Rebecca pointed out, like we are not covering today's workforce. And one thing that we proposed in that report that you referenced a decade ago, and that actually pandemic unemployment assistance looked remarkably similar to in some ways, is a job seekers allowance. In every other country that has a robust UI system, there's 2 tiers. There's one for folks who qualify for really robust earned benefits on the basis of their earnings history, and then there's one for new entrants, returning people coming back to the labor market, younger workers, folks who are independent contractors, and so on, and just a basic amount to live on while they search for their next job and become attached or reattached to the labor market. And so PUA actually, in some ways, looked very much like that job seekers allowance, that sort of second tier concept. And so I think, public opinion has turned or did turn post-pandemic for some good reasons and some just optics on, the pandemic unemployment programs. But I hope that there is a moment where we can revisit, what do unemployment protections broadly look like, expanding on the system that we have, even when we have pushed the absolute boundaries of what unemployment insurance as created 90 years ago looks like.
Great, thank you. I'm going to take a hard pivot. And Amy, I'm going to drop the UIF bomb. Fraud. More commonly referred to as program integrity. But things did truly go wrong in 2020 in terms of fraud, and I think that states have really done a lot of really good work to turn the corner and really drive down their fraud rates. But I kind of wanted to just get some of your thoughts about, fraud detection and prevention. And like, this is what I always say about unemployment insurance is like, it shouldn't, like little state UI agencies should never have been the tip of the spear against the Russian mob in 2020, right? But those same fraudsters are now attacking other things, and other government programs are learning from what unemployment insurance learned from. And I think that the unemployment insurance program should get a little bit of applause for all of the innovative work they've done to prevent and detect fraud. But I kind of wanted to get some of your thoughts about that.
Yeah, certainly. And I think the reality of 2020, the PUA programs, origins, implementation, lots of lessons there. And one of them that I come back to frequently is that rushed policymaking when things are baked into the text of the law, and then the implementation and technology, the range of options is limited in some ways, that creates a situation in which state agencies almost couldn't win, given the volumes that they had in their regular program, plus the expectation to serve new populations and to be constrained in some ways by the text of the law. And so I think one of the things that I think about is that the innovative thinking and the creativity legislatively or on the implementation side needs to happen when there's not a crisis. And so I think we've heard about several legislative efforts that have been floating around, and I am grateful for everyone who's working on these ideas when there's not a crisis. And the second thing I would say more broadly about fraud is that the pandemic fraud experience has shaped how people think and talk about UI fraud. That's what they think about when they think about UI fraud. But my joke has just been like, we're not in Kansas anymore. We're not in the pandemic anymore. The era of big, dumb, easy identity fraud is over in most states. Like, it is not what it was in 2020. And 2020 existed for a lot of really difficult reasons. We tried to legislatively close those doors. It took until December, so 2020 to me is the low point. We're not at that point anymore. The kind of fraud that we're facing now, which you sort of referenced, is these sophisticated international actors who I've been calling this the AI wars. So fraudsters are using AI effectively too. They're really good at fake documents. They're really good at fake faces, in fact, that can sometimes pass some liveness detection. And so I think this reality that whether UI likes it or not, we are in this game. So some states are moving to a statewide portal, so some of those responsibilities are getting pulled out of the UI office. But in a lot of cases, to me, this is about having a toolbox. Fraud is going to keep evolving. UI is not going to get saved by someone else in this environment. So what needs to be in the toolbox? And I think about it as capabilities across the life cycle of the claim journey. So there's things from the time before the person puts any information on the front page, you have information about them. You have information about their digital risk, about their device, about their location, about their browser. You have a ton of information already. Then you have what they tell you about who they are. You have the ability to compare that to lots of different sources of data. And you have the ability then to watch their behavior. Are they moving at the speed of a bot or a person? Are they connected to the device that they say that they're using? Has this identity been seen in the global ecosystem of transactions as one that's fraudulent? I don't think state workforce agencies should waste time, in some sense, on confirmed fraudulent identities. And I want them to have the tools to make those decisions prior to anyone in their team having to spend time, especially when staff time is such a rare and valuable commodity. So I think then there's the life cycle. They are updating their bank account information. They're changing their their communication information. They are acting suspiciously. We have behavioral flags that we need to pay attention to. And then even when we say, oh, this person might be suspicious, we need an efficient way to have a fraud investigation queue that can quickly resolve, yep, they are, nope, they're not, like keep paying them. And so I think that whole life cycle of capabilities, it's not one tool or one vendor or one thing that's going to fix that problem. It's a mindset of realizing that we're in this whether we want to be or not. It's not the pandemic anymore, but it's also still happening. And so I think one of the things I'm really excited about is the states that have risen to the challenge, been innovative, even with limited resources, about where to make those investments. So when I'm talking to states now, I talk a lot about where can you get return on investment? Where is the threat biggest, right? Like, we can tailor what you need to do to what you're facing. And not every state's facing the same thing. Not every state has the same risk tolerance. Not every state has the exact same process. So I think you make a good point that there is some kudos to go around in the UI community. I think there'd be an interesting research study, but I think there's also, like, we're not the pandemic, but it's also not gone. So how do we think about building capabilities that can evolve as the program evolves? So that's what I'm thinking about.
Great. So in keeping with our CEO's promise to keep this a little bit short, I have one last lightning round question for everybody. What is your greatest hope for unemployment insurance in the next 10 years? And I'll just start with Rebecca and move down.
So I would really hope that we would actually be able to do a redo of the 1996, whatever it was, and try to get to set the standards again. So is 26 weeks enough, or is 30 weeks enough? What is the replacement rate? We have all this new data from the pandemic, and I think that would also allow us to build towards some long-term public will to actually overhaul the program. So that would be my hope. Very nerdy.
I love it.
I'm gonna pull on the customer accessible thread, right? Like, we've become so layered with all this complex policy. Like, I can't understand our own UI application. Like, the terms are so technical, and I think there's this promise now with AI, with, widespread access to the internet, of really helping to make the process more claimant friendly, more responsive, and just faster. Like, we're counting this rate of getting to someone in 21 days. That is a lifetime when you are not being paid. Like, it's too late. There are too many bills that have already come due. And so, if there's a way we can get to that faster, more responsive, more, applicant-friendly world, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I agree with that. If we can have the promise of AI rather than the peril of AI, 100%. If we can't have that, I would love some federal momentum to fix the system. Is it too much to ask for a little more momentum in Congress to, we are not in the depths of a recession, as everybody has pointed out, the worst possible time to reform and fix the system. A little more will to do that, and some more money to do that over the coming years. And then if we can just stave off for a recession for 10 years, then maybe we can have a totally transformed system that actually, better protects many more workers.
I would say two things. One, financial sustainability. So that's both the solvency of the state UI trust funds and the administrative funding model, which I think all of us have our issues with for various reasons. I would love if CBO could change how it scores some things. And I think my bigger picture is that UI would be on a fiscal foundation that is sustainable. It's not right now, for lots of reasons, and I don't think that the decision about what sustainability looks like should be made at the federal level. I think states should get to decide for them where that foundation is, but some sort of sustainability there. And the second piece would be that the technology ecosystem becomes more flexible. States have access to more and different tools to make that accessibility happen, to expand if that's what states want to do. So.
All right, well, thank you. And I have to say, just in closing this out, I kind of wish all of you could have been on the panel, because all of you are people that I've learned from or, collaborated with in the past. And I really appreciate everyone in the audience, everybody coming in from the internet. And the UI community, it's kind of tiny, but really mighty. So I would just want to thank everyone in the room for everything you've done. I see people who've spent decades on this program and who I listen to and respect, and just let's keep it going forward for the next 90 years. I just cheersed with a microphone.